Captain's Log, Supplemental. The first round of talks went surprisingly well, if we ignore the fact my security team had to stun 6 drunk stormtroopers for attempting to blow a hole in my bulkhead, although to be honest, their accuracy was pretty shocking. Before we start, I shall be streaming on Twitch tonight. It will actually be fishing. Seriously, I'm getting tired of Assassin's Creed, even though I love the game. If you're at all interested in watching me play a fishing game, my Twitch channel is linked in the description down below. So today I want to address an article written by Tamari Kitosa, who is an associate professor of sociology at Brock University. Tamari has written an article for The Conversation. This article is titled How Hollywood's Alien and Predator Movies Reinforce Anti-Black Racism. I had initially, upon seeing the title, thought, bait or Poe? I'm inclined to believe, based on what I read, it is in fact bait, but it's a rather odd one, because the connections between current year and then the influences of how these particular creatures were, the alien and predator that is, were created, is a bit tangible, almost like it was used as, well, bait. Hard to believe, I know. What makes black people more likely than others to be killed, beaten, tortured, and raped by white police officers and vigilantes? Although black men are killed by the police more than any other group, black women are regular targets of police violence, even though this fact is often rendered invisible. I feel like this first paragraph on its own is trying to bait me into pulling out the statistics, because this is where honest and dishonest arguments are usually made. The argument is then based upon proportion of population, but then the counter to that is typically when someone pulls out the crime statistics of, by population of racial demographic, which then leads people to then say, this is not a good faith argument. A few years ago I did a video responding to Gabby Hanna of The Gabby Show, when she made arguments in the same manner of proportion of population to racial demographics in support of BLM back in 2017 or 2016, I can't remember which. My view is, if you're going to start doing it by population, and then by percentage of those that are of a particular race, you're not really addressing the actual issue, and that is the crime rate. Find a way to lower the crime rate, and this may well help in other areas. That's not to say people are particularly inclined towards committing crime because race. I'm more inclined to believe it's more of a cultural issue within certain areas. Poverty certainly plays a part. So back to the original paragraph, it's bait. A culture and history of racist misrepresentation may have something to do with it. Why has there been considerable tolerance among the silent majority of white people for animal-like demonic representations of black people in media and popular culture? I feel like this is the part where some may say this is clutching at straws, which there is a point to, because you're referencing Alien and Predator. That's not to say they are inherently protected. I do know about the issue with one white actress having to, let's say, Latina up with additional makeup, which was a tad stupid. The short answer is that we are dealing with a culture of domination. It is a culture that thrives on the sexualized demonization of black people. 2 examples of this are Ridley Scott's Alien, which comports with the trope of a black woman as alien breeders, and Predator, written by brothers Jim and John Thomas, that riffs on images of black men as dreadlocked, violent, and superhuman. It should be pointed out now, the concept for Alien as the being itself didn't come from Ridley Scott. It came from some Swiss designers who came up with several versions of Alien, the most menacing of which was the one we got, which took a considerable amount of effort to make because it wasn't exactly all CGI back then, was it? But Ridley Scott didn't want just some man in a rubber suit, so parts were taken off various different machines to give it what it got, to make it as menacing as it became, which is why the film Alien is as terrifying as it is. But that's the visual concept. It had never occurred to me, and I'll be honest, that an alien could be considered a black woman. It never occurred to me, but that's possibly a British thing, in the sense that I wasn't looking for racism. I merely watched a film and played the video game, and found it to be very amusing. The film, as a kid, a bit on the terrifying side. But then again, I felt like I was with my people, so I guess it swings and roundabouts. And as far as Predator goes, I was always led to believe it was less to do with the dreadlocks or the perceived dreadlocks, and more a creature with mandibles. But I could be wrong on that as well. The only thing I remember about that is the first one really freaked me out. I loved it. The following 2 paragraphs move on from mentioning Alien and Predator and reference George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, which to me seemed like an odd segue to go from referencing movies to immediately jump to current year. So I will instead skip ahead to the explanation of how a black woman is seen as alien. Black women have been portrayed in contemporary white social and political culture as super fertile and indestructible breeders whose sexual reproduction must be controlled. Oh boy, I sense the demonetization of this video already. Jeez. When somebody takes and applies some academic rigor to a movie about creatures from other planets, xenomorphs and Predator, and says that the portrayal of Alien is a black female who is a super breeder. Okay. That was just the Queen, you know. Did you ever watch the movies? I'm starting to think you didn't, and that you merely saw images and thought, well, they have darker skin tones, and therefore they must be racist, yo, swag. Oh, and I just want to go back to the reference of demonization of black people as well as the culture of domination. This argument that white people are inherently trying to dominate society. I would like to turn your attentions to Portland, Oregon, London, England perhaps as well. In fact, I'd like to turn your attention to movies more recently, television more recently. In fact, I could just say culture as a wider spectrum to encompass the arts, education. In fact, what you perceive is through a very particular lens, which makes it very irritating for me as an Englishman. Because it doesn't really apply in the UK. Well, as much apparently as it does in the US. That's not to deny any form of racism doesn't exist in the UK. That is an argument for another day. And to move on to Predator, I can be almost certain you haven't seen either Predator or Predator 2, which has a somewhat diverse cast. Initially in the first one with the skepticism, but the second was led by Danny Glover. So to be honest, my initial complaint about this entire thing being bait is starting to become more and more reinforced and likely. It is a tad tragic when people want to make arguments to try and wake people up to racism, but in doing so they make dishonest arguments, bad faith arguments, arguments that don't stack up to intellectual scrutiny, because we can tell from the offset you've seen something, looked at the concept image of it alone, or the finished image alone, and just reacted like a reactionary. I could have done the same if I'd just read the first paragraph and railed on you with statistics instead. But I did bother to read the entire thing, and at no point do you give any indication you know what you're talking about when it comes to the movies, which is why these arguments are bad faith. Oh, and as a final thing, the image you use to support the black women seen as an alien breeder is not an alien breeder. But okay, if anything, this just confirms my suspicion your entire article is a joke, bait, and trash. There are discussions that need to be had when it comes to movies of old, sure, but I think you lost the argument on this one when you proved you knew nothing of it. Either, in fact. And your weird segues that happen, which in truth makes very little sense to me, just show you were desperate to add an additional argument, but you failed to make the argument in favour of sensationalizing and alien predator, yo, dark skin must be representations of black people. With this, I'd love to know what you think. The article is linked down below, while the archived version of it. Please do let me know in the comments. If I don't see you on Twitch, have a fantastic Tuesday, and thank you all for listening.